In the spring of 1943, amidst the aftermath of the Philadelphia experiment, Edward Cameron found himself tangled in the wreckage of events he could hardly understand. The ship, the men, the experiments, all of it had gone so terribly wrong. His brother Duncan had disappeared into the unknown, leaving Edward behind in a storm of confusion and unanswered questions. The Navy, sensing the information that Edward had been exposed to might make him a liability, took swift action. John von Neumann, the brilliant scientist behind the Philadelphia experiment, had already seen the cracks forming, the instability that the Philadelphia experiment had caused. In a quiet conversation with Navy officials, he suggested a course of action: send Edward Cameron away from the chaos and give him a new mission. The solution, as it turned out, would take him far away from the wreckage of the Eldridge and into the heart of one of the most secretive, high-stakes scientific endeavors in history. It was suggested that Edward go to Los Alamos, the site of the Manhattan Project, where some of the brightest minds of the age, including J. Robert Oppenheimer, von Neumann, and Edward Teller, were working to create the atomic bomb. The Manhattan Project had already begun, and its importance was unquestionable. A weapon capable of unimaginable power was being forged in the desert. Edward arrived in Los Alamos in July 1944. During his time in Los Alamos, Edward contributed to the research and development of the atomic bomb. His responsibilities involved writing reports, assisting senior scientists such as Oppenheimer, Teller, and von Neumann, and making contributions to the theoretical and practical aspects of the project. Edwards thought his background in electromagnetic theory would make him a valuable asset in certain areas of the project, but Edwards described his role as somewhat a loose wheel, and while he was making contributions, he was not fully integrated into the core operations. Edward would often find himself in heated discussions with Edward Teller, who pushed for the development of the hydrogen bomb, a new phase of nuclear weaponry. Edward disagreed with Teller's approach, pointing out flaws in his mathematical models, which led to tensions between them. In 1947, after the atomic bomb was successfully developed and dropped, there were discussions about the future of Los Alamos Lab, including whether it would remain open or be shut down. Edward's time in Los Alamos was coming to an end, and the next chapter of his life would soon take him in a new, unexpected direction. On July 3rd, 1947, political tensions at Los Alamos escalated as Cameron clashed with Teller. A high-level meeting behind closed doors led to a vote for Cameron's removal from the project. The next day, he was arrested and charged with espionage. The charges were later dropped, but the political pressure was such that the Navy needed to get Edward out of Los Alamos. He was then reassigned to the Pentagon, and eventually a new assignment at Edwards Air Force Base in California, to work as an official observer for the Mach 1 project. While working on the Mach 1 project, Edward met a man named Jack Ridley, and together they proposed working on an ion propulsion system, a revolutionary thrust system using ionized particles. After years of research and failed tests, they achieved success in January 1953, with their engine generating 1,200 pounds of thrust for 20 minutes. This revolutionary breakthrough drew interest from aerospace giants like Douglas Aircraft and Martin Aircraft, who were eager to collaborate. However, their success led to complications. One day, while working in the research lab, Black Ops teams from covert military organizations, including Delta Force, showed up unannounced, and the project was taken over by a group known as the Cristaldi Research Group. As a result, Edward's involvement in the ion propulsion project ended abruptly. He was removed from the project and reassigned, leading him back to the Pentagon. Edward Cameron, in a fit of rage, went to speak with one of the Joint Chiefs in a quest for answers about his removal. He was told something disturbing. They told him the situation was out of their hands. This remark struck him deeply, making it clear that something far beyond the military's reach was influencing his fate. Frustrated and confused, Edward kept pressing for answers regarding his removal. He was finally informed that the decision had been made. He was being sent to Montauk. Edward could still remember the time he spent at Montauk with his brother Duncan, the time that he spent there in the future. He could still taste the ozone from the electromagnetic maelstrom he and Duncan traveled through. He was nervous to return there again, especially since none of his questions had been answered. Edward was being sent to Montauk under orders that seemed vague and ominous. All he was told was to go there and stand in the traffic circle at Montauk Air Force Station. After a few weeks had passed, he was escorted to Montauk. When he arrived, he saw the traffic circle and he approached it. He stood there and waited. After a while, his mind began to race in anticipation. And then, everything seemed to shift. The world around him faded as he was abruptly transported, not just through space, but through time itself. Suddenly, he found himself, once again, deep underground the Montauk base, and once again, the year was 1983. Edward had again traveled to the future. Upon his arrival, Edward was again met by Dr. John von Neumann, who explained that Edward's involvement was far beyond his control. Edward was told that he was about to be a subject in something called the Montauk Project. The project was about to use him in an experiment that would strip him of his memories entirely. The Montauk Project was using special equipment to perform a procedure they called age regression. They would make him a child once more, placing him into another time in a new family, hoping that he would forget everything about his past. Edward was terrified. Von Neumann shared his concern, warning that they had no choice in the matter now. There was no escape from the project's grasp. Edward was physically restrained and injected with a strange substance. He was then placed into a glass tube, surrounded by coils of wire. The machine before him was something he had never seen before. Its components and markings were unfamiliar, and the energy surrounding it was unnerving. It was not the kind of device one would expect in a military facility. It looked futuristic, yet somehow ancient, almost alien. The equipment hummed to life, and as the machine powered on, Edward's consciousness began to slip away. When Edward came to, he found himself in a completely different reality. He was now a young child, placed into a new family, a life that was not his own. But the strange thing was, for a moment, even as a child, he could understand everything around him. Though his body was that of a baby, his mind was that of an adult, able to comprehend complex conversations in a way that no ordinary child could. This marked the beginning of Edward's new life. The Montauk Project had manipulated his past, and with it, his future. His new name was now Al Bielek, and the year was 1927. Edward, now living as Al Bielek, went on to live a seemingly ordinary life. He lived in Long Island with his new family, with no recollection of his past life as Edward Cameron. By some feat of irony, or maybe fate, after high school, he was drafted into the Navy in July 1945 and wound up as an electronic technician. In 1953, he moved to California and pursued a career in electric engineering. His life seemed quite normal, and he was doing quite well for himself, until one day, Al Bielek picked up a magazine. As he flipped through the pages, he happened to read a story about the Philadelphia experiment. He couldn't explain why at the time, but something was drawing him into the story, and he felt a compulsion to learn more. Over the next 20 years, he made friends with like-minded people, and through those friendships, he ended up joining the United States Psychotronics Association and started attending conferences. In 1985, while attending an annual USPA conference, Al Bielek met a man he vaguely recognized, and as they conversed, Al began to feel an overwhelming sense of familiarity. Although he couldn't place where he had met the man before, the connection between them felt unmistakable. There was something deeply personal, something shared between them. Plus, the man's name happened to ring a bell. The man's name was Duncan Cameron. At this point, Al did not remember anything about his past or his connection to Duncan. The two brothers, separated by the events of the Philadelphia experiment, had not recognized each other, but the bond they shared was undeniable. The two unknowing brothers spoke for hours at the event, and before the conference ended, Duncan invited Al to come take a look at his friend's research lab. He invited Al to come stay with him at his place in Long Island, which was very close to the lab. In August 1985, Al visited Duncan, and a friend told them about a place called Montauk Point, a known psychic hotspot. Years earlier, while studying telepathy, he had discovered a daily 410 to 420 megahertz signal causing interference in his psychic's readings. Using a modified TV antenna and a VHF receiver, he traced it to a radio tower at Montauk Air Force Base. The interference continued for years, but had just recently stopped altogether. Intrigued, he invited Al and Duncan to test their psychic abilities there. As they arrived, Al could already tell something was very wrong. And as Al and Duncan moved through the desolate base, they exchanged looks, both instinctively sensing that something truly terrible had taken place there. Duncan, though unsure how he knew, seemed to navigate the area with ease. He instantly recognized buildings and could even recall small details, like the location of the mess hall. The base appeared abandoned, but it was in far worse condition than one would expect, with equipment scattered all around, all of it destroyed in a way that felt out of place for a military installation. A sense of unease grew within both men, as if the very air around them had carried the weight of a dark past. As they ventured deeper, Duncan began to recall fragments of disturbing experiments that had been carried out on the grounds. Slowly, he realized that he had been part of it all, though he couldn't yet piece together how or why. The men decided they had seen enough, and it was time to leave. Al ended up staying at Duncan's place longer than the initial 2 weeks that he had planned for. Him and Duncan visited Montauk Base a few more times, and after a few more weeks, Al returned home to California. Over the course of a year, Al kept returning to Montauk Point. Each trip stirred something deep within them, their buried memories clawing their way to the surface. What began as fleeting blurred impressions soon sharpened into haunting vivid recollections. With every visit, the intensity grew. Fragmented images, whispers of the past, and a chilling sense that something long forgotten was forcing its way back into their minds. Then, in an instant, it struck him like a ton of bricks. Memories, long buried, came flooding back with relentless force. Al suddenly remembered he had served aboard the USS Eldridge, and Duncan Cameron, he wasn't just a friend. Duncan was his brother. The past unraveling before them, no longer just fragments, but a terrifying truth. They were the two sailors lost in the infamous Philadelphia experiment. Al could now recall his life as Edward Cameron, the man he once was before becoming Al Bielek. He saw it all, the deck of the USS Eldridge beneath his feet, Duncan beside him, the screams and torment of the crew, the panic, the chaos, and the desperate final act of him and Duncan running towards the edge of the ship. Al Bielek remembered jumping over the railing of the USS Eldridge with his brother Duncan, and when they landed, it was the year 1983, except it wasn't. There was something deeper, a deeper memory that was just out of reach, a flickering glimpse of a past just on the horizon of his mind. The two brothers, lost in time, went back and forth, both knowing there was something they were missing, as though it was just being blocked by some unknown force. And then suddenly, Al and Duncan both looked at each other, and they could remember. Edward and Duncan leapt over the railing of the USS Eldridge and into the unknown. When Edward regained consciousness, he was in a hospital bed, Duncan lying beside him. Doctors and nurses moved around them, treating the burns and radiation wounds that they had suffered from passing through the eerie blue-green fog of the Eldridge. Disoriented and helpless, they could do nothing but watch the television. But as they absorbed the broadcast, a chilling realization set in. They were no longer in their own time. The year was not 1983. It was now 2137. By 2137, the world had been devastated. The rise of the New World Order led to escalating tensions, culminating into World War III, a catastrophic conflict between Russia and China against the US and Europe. Nuclear strikes obliterated several major cities, and eventually the New World Order collapsed. But the destruction didn't stop with just war. Plagues, famine, economic collapse, and transportation failures pushed humanity to the brink, while wars with flesh-eating alien species accelerated the downfall. The global population plummeted to just 300 million. Governments crumbled, and what remained of the US and Canada fell under strict martial law. The United States was unrecognizable. Florida and much of the East Coast were swallowed by the ocean, while California had fractured into small islands, with Los Angeles barely functioning. The Mississippi River had widened to 30 miles across, merging the Great Lakes into a vast inland sea. In Europe, most of England was gone, leaving only the Scottish Highlands and part of Ireland. Even Switzerland had been partially submerged. One day, while watching TV and talking with his brother, Edward found himself once again pulled hundreds of years into the future, this time landing in the year 2749. A world so alien to him that he could hardly comprehend it. When he arrived, he looked around, and Duncan was nowhere to be found, leaving Edward alone to navigate the vastly different reality. And for the next 2 years, Edward would adapt to the advances of the 28th century. The most striking change was the rise of anti-gravity technology, giving birth to floating cities suspending miles above Earth. These cities were governed by an incredibly advanced AI system built upon a crystalline structure and managed through an intricate web-like telepathy network. The programmers of these computers were called the Wingmakers. Using this network, the floating cities could be moved to different parts of the Earth. The global population in the year 2749 was now 500 million and was designed to stay that way, per order of the AI that governed their every move. Life here was effortless, provided you contributed to the greater good. While all basic needs were met, there was no need for money or banks, and AI-controlled robotic systems ran everything from agriculture to food production. You were not obligated to work, but many people did, due to a sort of social credit system. If you committed a misdemeanor crime, you would be telepathically interviewed by the AI crystalline structure, and if you were found guilty, you would be sent to a work camp. If you were found to commit a felony, you would be terminated immediately. Despite the ease and convenience, something felt amiss. Edward couldn't shake the feeling that humanity had lost something. People seemed to have forfeited their sense of identity and purpose in exchange for a life of comfort. For these reasons, many people opted out of this society. Nobody really knew where they went or what they did, but they simply left and never came back. After spending 2 years, from 2749 to 2751, Edward was abruptly sent back to 2137, tasked with a singular mission: to find Duncan. But when the brothers reunited, something unimaginable happened. In an instant, they were transported back to 1983, standing once again in front of the Montauk Point base, right back where they had stood all those years ago, facing the same chain-link fence with helicopters circling above and their spotlights fixed on them. Unbeknownst to them, at that moment, both Edward and Duncan had completely lost their memory of their previous journeys to the years 2137 and 2749. By the end of 1986, Al Bielek, who had once gone by the name of Edward Cameron, and his brother Duncan Cameron, had regained most of their memories surrounding their involvement in the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project. But one question remained: why had they forgotten all of it? For Al, the answer lay in a deliberate suppression of memory through advanced technologies tied to the experiments themselves. The key to understanding this forgotten life was rooted in the interplay between time tunnels and the fragmentation of the human mind. The Montauk Project was an operation that utilized groundbreaking technology to manipulate space and time. Central to this effort were time tunnels, artificial portals created using advanced electronics and extraterrestrial guidance. These portals could connect distant locations, different times, and even different timelines. Upon their return, their memories of these missions were wiped clean, an effect attributed to both technology and the mind's natural rejection of conflicting realities. For Al, this technology was the gateway to an extraordinary double life. In his civilian existence, he worked as an engineer in Los Angeles, leading to what seemed to be an ordinary life. Simultaneously, he was deeply involved in the Montauk Project. The time tunnels enabled him to transition seamlessly between these two lives. He would spend weeks or months at Montauk and then be returned to Los Angeles at the exact moment he had left, leaving no trace of his absence in his conscious memory. The Montauk Project relied on secrecy and control. By erasing the participants' memories, the operators ensured that their work remained hidden, even from those directly involved. The Montauk Project's goals didn't just stop at time travel. It was a Pandora's box of forbidden science, pushing beyond time travel into mind control and reality manipulation. Al played a key role in all of these developments, helping develop the Montauk Chair, a device that amplified psychic abilities. Ethics were abandoned in the relentless pursuit of power, and Duncan Cameron's extraordinary psychic gifts made him the ideal test subject. The Montauk Chair was a psychic enhancement device, and when Duncan sat down in it, he could extract and project his thoughts onto a computer screen in real time. But his abilities soon surpassed expectations. Eventually, he developed a technique called the seeing eye, which allowed him to enter another person's mind as long as he held a personal object of theirs. He could see through their eyes, hear what they heard, and even feel their emotions. As experiments escalated, Duncan's powers grew. He could implant thoughts, control actions, and bend minds to the Montauk Project's will, offering the military a weapon unlike anything before. But the true breakthrough came when his focus could alone manifest physical objects. Scientists harnessed this ability, integrating his psychic energy with an advanced antenna system to tear open portals through time itself. These time tunnels became the backbone of the Montauk Project, the same pathways that Al Bielek had been using for his journeys through time. If you remember, In the aftermath of the Philadelphia experiment, Duncan jumped overboard, vanishing from 1943, while Edward remained behind. Unbeknownst to Edward, Duncan reappeared in 1983 and became instrumental in the Montauk Project. The very time tunnels that Al had been using the whole time were in fact created by Duncan all along. However, repeated use of Duncan's abilities began to take a toll. The extensive strain of time travel and psychic manipulation caused his body to age rapidly. Facing the prospect of Duncan's imminent death, Dr. John von Neumann, who had been working on the project, recognized the catastrophic potential of losing someone so intricately tied to multiple events across the timeline. Such a loss could lead to paradoxes with devastating consequences. To avert these disasters, the Montauk team devised a radical solution. They sent a message back in time to Duncan's father, Duncan Cameron Sr., instructing him to have another child, a son, and name him Duncan. Born in 1951, this child would later become the vessel for the original Duncan's consciousness. This transfer ensured continuity in the timeline and avoided the paradoxes, a technique similar to how Edward Cameron's consciousness was transported into the body of Al Bielek. As these experiments grew increasingly dangerous, one of the lead researchers of the Montauk Project began questioning the project's morality and its impact on the participants and the fabric of space and time itself. And right before Duncan's consciousness was transported, it was decided it was time to end the Montauk Project. And to do this, the project had a contingency plan in place. Someone quietly approached Duncan in the Montauk chair and whispered the phrase, "The time is now." This trigger phrase unleashed a terrifying force from Duncan's subconscious, a monstrous entity that stood 10 feet tall, a hairy and ferocious beast, emerged somewhere on the base. It rampaged through the facility, destroying everything from concrete walls to computers. It destroyed everything in its way. Despite efforts to shut down the power generators, the creature remained unstoppable. Some of the men took drastic measures, cutting power lines, dismantling equipment, and even using blowtorches to destroy the transmitter. Although the lights went out, the monster persisted. Finally, after extensive destruction, the portal that Duncan had created was closed, and the creature vanished. For Al and Duncan, this marked the end of the Montauk Project. But Al and Duncan weren't the only ones left broken in its wake. As time went on, Al's recollections of the Montauk Project extended beyond the scientific research, and he began to recall its more sinister elements. He began to remember the Montauk boys, young subjects subjected to intense psychological conditioning. The goal of these experiments was to produce mind control operatives, individuals who would execute missions without any conscious awareness. These boys were essentially sleeper cell agents. Many of these boys were either runaways or taken from troubled homes, marked by neglect, addiction, and instability. Tragically, most were between the ages of 10 and 15. In order to make the children receptive to this kind of mind control, their psychological defenses had to be shattered. This process involved starvation, physical abuse, electric shock, and near drowning from cold water immersion. These methods were repeated relentlessly until the children's minds were vulnerable to the new programming. Many of the children didn't survive this stage of the experiment, and it's believed that they were buried in a secret location beneath the base, still considered missing to this day. Some speculate that the Montauk mind control experiments extended beyond humans. The equipment that was used during the experiments had strange effects, disrupting TV and radio signals, causing unusual behavior in local wildlife. Deer, in particular, were affected, running into towns and crashing into buildings. Many wonder, was this a deliberate attempt to weaponize animals? Or was this the byproduct of an attempt to affect the masses? In 2008, A mysterious creature known as the Montauk Monster washed ashore, fueling further speculation. Just across the Long Island Sound lies Plum Island, home to the Animal Disease Research Center, where rumors of animal experiments, biological warfare, and human-animal hybrids have circulated. Could the Montauk Monster have come from there? Some speculate there is some connection to the Montauk Project. Over the years, many have gone to Montauk Point in search for answers. Some claim to have found underground tunnels and bunkers. Many have gone and suddenly felt ill from unexplained energies still present to this day. Those same people claim to miraculously feel better as soon as they left. Al Bielek's memories of his involvement in the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project continued to return until the day he died, in 2011. He grappled with the implications of his dual existence, that he had lived two separate lives, one as an unassuming engineer and another as a pivotal figure in the Montauk Project. His story became a testament to the psychological and existential challenges posed by advanced temporal technologies. It also highlighted the ethical dilemmas inherent in such experiments, as the pursuit of knowledge eventually came at the cost of human agency. Until next time, stay vigilant, fellow truth seekers, because the truth is out there. End transmission.